So you mentioned later on, it's a whole paragraph, so I'm not going to really, I can read it if you want, but you mainly talk about what was it, I'll read it. So you wrote, what was Israel to do after 7th of October? Didn't it have a right to self-defense? So you posed that question on
That was
Israel.
the Piers Morgan program. I called those. There were two Piers Morgan questions he has asked, because it's not over, for the last 14 months. Question number one: do you condemn what Hamas did in October 7th? Question number two: what was Israel supposed to do? Didn't they have a right to self-defense?
What's up, everyone? In this clip, Norman Finkelstein doesn't pull any punches. He goes toe-to-toe with Eli Hassell on his own show, taking apart pro-Israel arguments in the most meticulous and brutal way possible. This is the kind of discussion that gets everyone uncomfortable because it dives deep into the moral and political hypocrisies that nobody wants to talk about. Finkelstein's analogies, historical references, and no-holds-barred logic will make you rethink everything you've been told. So without wasting any time, let's get into this clip. We'll give you guys our inputs as always, so let's get into it.
So you're assuming he's going to read your book. So you wrote, consider this hypothetical. A woman is battered by her husband day in and day out for decades. She lets out a shriek of agony and despair. The neighbors ignore her pleas. She contacts the police. After conducting a thorough investigation, they file a devastating report, but it's left in a desk drawer to collect dust. One day, as he approaches her, the battered woman decides to take matters into her own hands and reaches for a knife and stabs him once, twice, 3 times. He grabs his pistol and shoots her dead in self-defense. The wife batterer would more likely than not be acquitted of murder in the court of law. But did he have the moral right to kill her? So if I'm right, it seems that you're saying that the people in Gaza have been abused for a long time, so you've got to expect some violence to come out.
Well, not quite. Mr. Hassell, unfortunately, we're pressed for time, but I have to be very clear about what I wrote. If the woman had not let out any screams, if she had not called the police, then I would say she had not exploited all the options that were available to her. And therefore, her case for stabbing the man would have been significantly weakened. But I was very careful to say she yelled and screamed in agony and torment, hoping to call attention to her battery. And those screams and torments were ignored. She then called the police. The police filed reports. You want to know what those reports are called? The Goldstone Report, the Mary McGowan Davis Report, the dozens of Amnesty International reports, the dozens of Human Rights Watch reports, all of them confirming that Israel's committing war crimes and plausibly crimes against humanity in Gaza.
Boom, Finkelstein doesn't just stop at the analogy, he backs it up with real-world evidence. These reports are like the receipts that everyone pretends don't exist. How many times have we seen the international community document crimes, publish lengthy, detailed findings, and then nothing? It's like someone investigating a bank robbery, finding the stolen cash in someone's living room, and then shrugging their shoulders because the culprit has too much power. The hypocrisy is staggering, and Finkelstein's delivery makes it impossible to ignore. It's honestly crazy, and I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts down in the comments.
Hamas cooperated with all the commissions, whereas Israel refused to cooperate with the Goldstone Commission, for example, or the Goldstone Mission. Hamas cooperated. Now, Hamas knew that these missions would also indict them for war crimes. They knew that. There's a long record of these missions indicting Israel, but never forgetting to indict Hamas. And the same thing was done by Karim Khan, the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. Yes, he issued arrest warrants for Israel, Gallant and Netanyahu, but he also issued arrest warrants. But here's the difference. In every instance, Hamas, even though it knew it itself would be indicted, Hamas cooperated in the hope that maybe, just maybe, they would get justice for the people of Gaza.
This is such a critical point that most people overlook. Think about the implications here. Hamas, knowing full well that they'd face indictment too, still chose to cooperate with international investigations. Compare that to Israel refusing to even engage. What does that tell you? One side is saying, we'll play by the rules if it means exposing the truth, while the other side says, rules don't apply to us. And yet we're told treat both sides equally. It's the ultimate double standard, and Finkelstein lays it out so cleanly you cannot argue with it.
And each of those reports was exhaustive. I mean, we're talking about very large reports. The Goldstone report, I forgot now, but must have run into 300 pages. And totally ignored. So you tried, in the metaphor of the woman, or the analogy of the woman, you tried screaming and yelling, you're ignored. You called the police, you're ignored. Then I would say that woman exhausted all options short of stabbing the man, her batterer for 20 years, stabbing him in order to put an end for once and for all to her agony and her torment. And I do believe the man, even though more likely than not, it's called the castle doctrine, as in a man's home is his castle, the castle doctrine, the man would be acquitted in court on the grounds of self-defense. I believe he had no right to shoot her. He forfeited that right as a result of the 20 years of tormenting her. And she had a right to live because she exhausted all available options.
But in terms of Gaza and Israel, if the people of Gaza came out and attacked military places in Israel, that would make, but they didn't do that. They attacked civilians. And by the, just to keep in mind, we've got 5 minutes left.
Well, I recognize that as a question. I am not dogmatic. So I'll put the question to you. If Hamas had killed on October 7th, not 850 civilians, and roughly speaking, 300 combatants. If Hamas had only killed combatants, 1,200, let's just say, it just killed combatants. Mr. Hassell, you just came back from Israel. You informed me before the program began. Do you seriously believe, can you possibly believe, that Israel's reaction to the killing of 1,200 combatants would have been less furious?
Here's where Finkelstein really twists the knife. He's challenging the assumption that Israel's outrage is based on the nature of the attacks. And honestly, he's right to call it out. If Hamas had targeted only combatants, do you think Israel's reaction would have been less extreme? I'm genuinely curious to hear your guys' thoughts, because this idea that the response is somehow measured by the target type is a smokescreen. The real issue is power dynamics. I think Israel would have gone nuclear, figuratively speaking, of course, no matter what, because their outrage isn't about justice, it's about control. But again, I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts down in the comments.
So
Then the fact that, excuse me?
So
Do you
what?
believe the reaction would have been less furious than if they killed 800 civilians and 300 combatants? It would have been, that's ridiculous. Israel is a Spartan society. It attaches more value to a combatant's death than a civilian's death. The reaction, not that it's physically possible, but were it physically possible, the reaction would have been 10 times more furious if they had killed 1,200 combatants. Do you seriously believe the international community would have been less supportive of Israel if Hamas had killed 1,200 combatants? I think that's ridiculous. It's not believable. So
my question isn't on what Israel's response is. It's more on your example, and your example is more, taking out the target. And wouldn't, if Gaza want to do that, right? Wouldn't they actually target military targets, which might help them?
No.
What's the point of killing civilians?
Well, the point of committing civilians is very simple: to transmit the message to Israel. If you are going to murder our civilians, we're going to murder yours. If our civilians aren't safe, your civilians aren't safe. If you're going to periodically commit high-tech killing sprees in Gaza at your whim, well, we're going to commit low-tech, very low-tech as it happened, low-tech killing sprees in Israel.
This line is brutal, but it's on point. Finkelstein is stripping away the fluff and calling out the ugly truth. One side has drones, airstrikes, and state-of-the-art weaponry, while the other side is scraping together what they can just to make a statement. High-tech versus low-tech, both are horrifying, but the context matters. Imagine being told to sit quietly while someone uses advanced machinery to level your home. How long can anyone endure that before snapping? It's raw, it's uncomfortable, and it's exactly the kind of perspective that mainstream narratives avoid like the plague.
So my view is, when I thought through the whole matter, I thought the most compelling statement, you'll find it in that introduction. If you look back at the text, there is a quote I give from what was called the New York Working Men's Party. Okay, it's indented in smaller font. Okay, I'd like you to read. Now, the New York Working Men's Party described the Nat Turner Rebellion, the rebellion of the African American slaves in 1831, led by Nat Turner. The New York Working Men's Party said it was an unjustifiable atrocity. An unjustifiable atrocity. We're not going to try to justify it. The atrocities that occurred in October during the Nat Turner revolt were unjustifiable. You can't justify them. I agree with that regarding October 7th. They're unjustified. You can't justify them. But then what did they go on to say? They said, what were they guilty of? Were they out to plunder, steal? No. They wanted to be free. Mm-hmm. And in their minds, the only way they could be free was to indiscriminately, notice the word, to indiscriminately kill that whole race of people who they justifiably believe were the source of their torment and agony in life.
This is where Finkelstein pushes the boundaries of what most people are willing to acknowledge. He's not condoning the atrocities, he's explaining the mindset behind them. And that's what makes this so powerful. It's easy to condemn actions in isolation, but when you start digging into the causes, the systematic oppression, the decades of suffering, it becomes harder to dismiss these acts as mindless violence. It's not about excusing anything, it's about understanding how we got here. If we don't, we're just perpetuating the cycle of blame and destruction, which is what I want us to avoid.
And in my opinion, that's the correct moral balance. The atrocities, they can't be justified. But the belief that the only way that the people of Gaza could end their torment and acquire their God given right to freedom, the only way they could attain that goal was to, quote, indiscriminately kill the race of people who they justifiably believed were responsible for their torment. I think that's an accurate depiction of the Nat Turner Rebellion, or I should say, an accurate moral judgment on the Nat Turner Rebellion, and it's a correct moral judgment on October 7th. They justifiably believed that the only way to free themselves from this torment, this 70-year torment, was to indiscriminately kill the whole of that race, which they, to quote the New York Working Men's Party, justifiably believed was responsible for their enslavement.
Let's be real. This is a horrifying statement, but it's rooted in desperation. Finkelstein is forcing us to confront the brutal logic that comes from being trapped in an inescapable situation. It's not pretty, it's not easy to digest, but it's real. And isn't that what we need more of in these discussions? Real talk about how oppression warps morality and drives people to extremes. Ignoring this context doesn't make it go away. It just ensures we'll keep seeing the same tragedies play out over and over again. And that is the takeaway here. I love how Finkelstein isn't here to sugarcoat anything, and that's exactly why his arguments hit so hard. Whether you agree with him or not, you can't deny that he forces us to confront the uncomfortable truths that most people shy away from, especially mainstream media. So what do you think? Did Finkelstein shut down Eli Hassell, or is there more to this debate? Let me know in the comments below. Be sure to give us a like and subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next take as always.